A couple weeks ago, we talked about David and how he was anointed. He was chosen to be king. And so Samuel the prophet came and poured a little bit of olive oil on his head to show that he was the one chosen to be king by God. Remember, he was out in the fields. He was the eighth. He was the youngest son. And they said, well, there's one more. He's out in the fields with the sheep. They said, well, we won't sit down until he comes in, because he was the important one. He was the one chosen to be king. So he was an anointed one, we could say. He was anointed king, which is what the word Messiah means. Okay, so we could say David was a Messiah, but there is one who came who is much greater than David, who is the Messiah, and of course that's Jesus. We know the answer. And Jesus is the Messiah, meaning he's going to be the king of the whole world when he comes back, not just Israel. But he didn't get to be king yet, because Saul was still king. Saul was the first king of Israel, and he turned out to be evil. And then he turned out to be very jealous of David, because David had some success in battle. And people really loved David, but he wasn't the king. Saul was still the king, and Saul was very jealous of David. So he was actually trying to kill David. So David was out in the wilderness, hiding basically from Saul and living out there. And he gathered around him 600 men, a lot of people who wanted to live out in the wilderness with him. So all of those people obviously have to eat. And if you have to eat, you have to work for food somehow. So what were they doing out there? 600 men. Well, at this point, they were actually guarding some shepherds and some sheep of a very wealthy man who had a bunch of sheep. So this is in 1 Samuel 25, verse 3. So this wealthy man's name was Nabal, or Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man, Nabal, was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. So his name, Nabal, actually means fool in Hebrew. And this is, we'll see what he turned out to be. He actually lived up to his name, or we'll say lived down to his name. Okay, so he was very wealthy, as 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Sounds like a lot to me, even now, I think. Okay, so it was coming time to shear the sheep, which is probably know to take the wool off the sheep and sell it. So this was a big deal, because this is where you would make your money. Now, David and his men had been helping to guard the men who guarded the sheep. And David would have been good at that, right? Because he had been a shepherd before. So he was out there in the wilderness, he and his 600 men, basically payday, because payday is when you shear the sheep. And so it's time for everyone to get paid who had helped with the sheep, because we're going to sell the wool and we're going to make a big party of it, of shearing the sheep and get the wool, and then we sell the wool. And it's time that everyone should get what they deserve, right? It's time to ask Nabal to pay up. So David sent some men, some messengers to Nabal to say, look, we've done this for you. We've helped out. It's time to give what you have to us. We're 600 men out here. Okay, but Nabal answered very, very badly. Okay. All right, so not only did he not pay up, he acted like he'd never even heard of David or his men. And these men had been faithfully guarding his own men out with the sheep near the wilderness here. And then verse 13. So they were ready to fight Nabal. So 400 men went with David, 200 men stayed behind, 600 men total. It's a big army, I would say. And so disaster is about to happen, right? Not a good thing. So one of the servants went and told Nabal's wife, Abigail. Remember, she was the one who was beautiful and intelligent. So they thought, maybe she could put a stop to this disaster before it happened. But meanwhile, David was thinking to himself, verse 21, I did all this for nothing. I guarded this man and his men and his sheep in the wilderness, and he hasn't paid me what he owes me, basically. He didn't know that Abigail was on her way at that point. So then she met David. Okay, two things I want you to notice about this. First of all, the respect that Abigail shows to David. She knows that he is the one chosen to be king, the anointed king. And even though he's not king yet, she shows him a great deal of respect. And part of that is she keeps calling him over and over. I haven't counted them, but a lot of times she calls him my Lord. And that word in Hebrew is adoni. And it's almost like saying sir in English. It's a very respectful way of talking to somebody. My Lord. It's even more respectful than sir, I think. So adoni. So just remember that word. That means my Lord, adoni. Definitely not to be confused with in the Shema when we say Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That is obviously the Lord God. That's Adonai. That's not David. we won't get those confused. So this is Adoni, my Lord, and this is what Abigail calls David many, many times as a sign of respect to him. Okay, so verse 23, when Abigail saw David, so she came on her donkey, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey, and she fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. So she knows that David is going to be king of Israel and that he is fighting the battles of the Lord, which is the Lord God, obviously, and evil will not be found in you all your days. So she had this great respect for David as the anointed king, as she should, and she called him my Lord Adoni,